Throughout the history of the church, many Christians have held that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, also known as the Torah. However, many critical scholars argue that Moses did not even write a single word of it. But today I would like to present something much more modest. If you believe that Moses was the author of the Torah, the text itself demonstrates that a later scribe or editor changed and added to the books after the originals were written. So in other words, Moses did not write all of the Torah. Today we're going to look at 3 different examples from the text that demonstrates this point. So let's first start with an obvious one. If there's anything that Moses did not write that I'm sure of, then it would be his obituary. In Deuteronomy chapter 34, it reads, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, and no one knows his burial place to this day. Not only is it clear that the author of this text wrote this after Moses had died, but there are also several clues that a significant amount of time must have passed between Moses' death and when this was written. So you can see in this phrase, to this day, this comes up a lot throughout the Torah. And what this is saying is that long after Moses had died, people still did not know where he was buried. Also, a few verses later in verse 10, we read, Since that time, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. Again, you would not say this if Moses had only died a year ago by the time that this was written, because it wouldn't have any rhetorical force unless this comment was written long after Moses had died. Different sides of Moses are shown throughout the Torah. But a verse in Numbers 12 says, Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any person who was on the face of the earth. Now, for one, this is written in third person. But I also doubt that someone would write this about themselves. It would be like saying, Hey everyone, I'm the most humble person on the earth. If someone actually said this, you would think the opposite of them. Scholars, when they look at something like this, noticing that Moses probably didn't write it, argue that an editor must have added this comment to the original text after the fact. We don't know why the editor added this comment, but one reason that's been proposed is that the editor is trying to ground the humanity of Moses, to say that even though Moses had all these experiences with God, he was just a human like the rest of us. The third example is a phrase we discussed earlier, to this day. Here we have verses in Genesis, where the city is still being called Beersheba to this day. We have this tradition where the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh of the hip socket because of when Jacob wrestled the angel of the Lord in Genesis 32. We have a statute concerning Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And then in Deuteronomy, we have one about the tribe of Levi. And these phrases are sprinkled all throughout the Torah. But perhaps the biggest example is here in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 29, where we read, All the nations will say, Why has the Lord done all this to this land? Why this great outburst of anger? Then people will say, It is because they abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods that they have not known and whom he had not assigned to them. Therefore the anger of the Lord burned against the land, to bring upon it every curse which is written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them from their land in anger, fury, and in great wrath, and hurled them into another land as it is this day. The strange thing about this passage is that it seems to be indicating that the children of Israel had already been hurled into another land, and that they are still in this other land at the time of writing. In order to understand the significance of this, we need to look at a brief history of Israel in the land. During the time of Moses, obviously the people had not entered the promised land for the first time yet. Then after this comes the period of Joshua and Judges, where the people are in the land. After this, there's the monarchy, where again they're still in the land. And then finally, in 722 BC, the people of Israel are exiled out of their land by the Assyrians. So to reiterate this, the text in Deuteronomy 29 about Israel being exiled into another land must have been added to this text sometime after 722 BC. So again, what this is saying is that the comment is written after Israel had already been hurled into another land in exile. We find details of the Assyrian exile in the book of 2 Kings, where it also lists the reasons why Israel was in exile. Israel rejected his statutes and his covenant. Israel abandoned all the commandments of the Lord, and Israel feared other gods. But then when you look at the reasons given in Deuteronomy 29, it says that Israel abandoned the covenant of the Lord, and Israel went and served other gods and worshipped them. In other words, the same reasons are given in 2 Kings and Deuteronomy, which could mean that this editor who added these comments in Deuteronomy 29 was aware of the passage in 2 Kings. But either way, this at least shows that an editor added or updated Deuteronomy 29 at some point after Israel was in exile in 722 BC, and that the editor did this so that his audience and later readers would know the reason why Israel was in exile, and that was because they had went and worshipped other gods. In summary, an anonymous editor after the death of Moses added things to the text, such as the death of Moses, the comment about Moses being the most humble man on the face of the earth, and then all of the phrases like "to this day" that are sprinkled throughout the Torah in order to update the audience and future generations that would read this text. So what are some takeaways from this? Well, I think we can say at least that Moses did not write every word from Genesis 1 to the end of Deuteronomy, for starters. I also think we must say that the Torah was written, edited, and preserved for centuries, well after Moses had lived. But for me, the last two reasons are the most important. I think we need to take things like this into account for our doctrine of inspiration, that there were multiple authors or editors of texts in the Bible, and that maybe what we think about authorship in the modern world today is not exactly how the books of the Bible were written back in ancient times. And lastly, I think we need to acknowledge the human side of the Bible. The Bible is a very human book in a very real sense. It did not fall out of the sky from heaven into one leather-bound book. Instead, God allowed the Bible to be edited and compiled together long after individual books were written. God allowed Paul to use a scribe to write the book of Romans. God allowed the Bible to be translated into many different languages. Simply put, God allowed imperfect humans to write, add, edit, compile, and translate the Bible. And what I want to submit to you is that when we accept the Bible for what it is, and when we acknowledge the human side of it, it is then that we will begin to see its beautiful complexity. And instead of viewing the Bible as a problem to be solved, we will begin to view the Bible as a treasure map to be explored. Ultimately, we will see the Bible as God intended it to be.